Thank you, everybody. Kevin, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jim.
So for those that don't know, we're not going to make this a commercial. I spent 18 years at Visa prior to joining Thredd. Kevin is a great client of ours and a great friend as well. But before we jump into the subject, I'm a big fan of history, having spent 18 years at Visa and having been in the room for a lot of the great innovations over the last 20 years. And I think a lot of what Kevin does rides on a lot of those great innovations. And so before we jump in, the way I like to think about this subject, and coming here today, I started to think about what's going on across all these halls. And so in thinking about that, and coming here and thinking about what you do, I went back to the 2008 time period and thinking about Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper on the Bitcoin and the peer-to-peer electronic cash white paper. And the reaction that went on inside of the Visa ecosystem about, is this going to be a big disruption? And I remember having to speak to the Visa board on several occasions about that, is this going to blow up, Visa and the payments ecosystem? Glad to say it did, and actually became a big business for Visa with cards as on-ramps and off-ramps. Yeah. But it did lay the foundation for a lot of big innovations in the payments ecosystem, namely the blockchain. That leads another 10 years into the future, 2018, and a couple big things happen. You and Darren co-found Reap. And then also another very interesting happens in that year, which is Circle introduces the USDC. And then you think about 7 years later, 2025, and we're all here at Singapore Fintech Fest, and I have just come from 2 weeks ago. I was in Money 2020 in Las Vegas, last week at Hong Kong Fintech Week, as were you. But I have to say, even in the last 2 weeks, having come from both of those shows, which are also pretty big shows, I honestly have to say Singapore has just blown me away with the amount of momentum and acceleration in the amount of stablecoin discussions, even walking from hall to hall, turning on the TV in my hotel room on CNBC. It's like everyone is talking about stablecoins. So my question to you to start this is, having been kind of birthed in the middle of this in 2018 as Reap, can you talk about, for everybody's benefit, who is Reap? What do you guys do? But also, why now? Like in 2025, what has changed? What does stablecoins mean to you, and why now? Like in terms of this acceleration.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Jim. Hey, everybody. I'm Kevin, one of the co-founders here at Reap. Just to give a quick, brief overview of what we do, Reap is a financial infrastructure technology provider, and we work closely with partners like Thredd, like Visa, to offer services such as card issuing and cross-border money movement for various other fintech players, neobanks in the world. As part of that, we're leveraging stablecoin technology to facilitate money movement for some of these services to achieve higher efficiencies, lower costs, more reliability for both ourselves internally as well as for the customers that we serve around the world. I think it's quite interesting that we talk about Visa a lot. I always go back to the founder of Visa, Dee Hock, who once famously said this quote that money is not coin, currency, or credit cards. That's actually the form, not the factor. And so I think about that very much for stablecoins, which is, it is a technology, it is a representation of value, it is a digitized form of currency that allows us to essentially move funds a lot more efficiently. Especially now, today, bringing us to 2025, businesses are becoming increasingly global, right? And it's not just the big enterprises that have huge headquarters in Europe, here in Asia. If you think about small SMEs, online merchants, they could have one person being based in Dubai and one person being based here in Singapore, and they just need a way to make money movement happen a lot more efficiently, and they need the access to a digitized form of currency that would give them, I would say, equal access or inclusion to access that these traditional bigger players have, such as card issuing, such as cross-border money movement. So it really has democratized the way in which we access financial services, and it's a means to an end. It's a means to get access to some of these financial capabilities that we are providing as a service provider.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Let me unpack that a little bit. So in other words, I mean, when those clients come to you, and let me ask it a different way. Do they come to you saying, I need stable coins, or do they come to you saying, I've got business problems, and can you help me solve them? Like, my guess is they're not asking for stable coins. They're saying, can you help me, move money, or I've got issues because I'm in multi-regions, and I need to move money quickly. Like, what are the business problems they're trying to solve, and then how does stable coins actually help you facilitate that in ways that they couldn't do before?
Yeah, so it really does start at the problem. It's one of the reasons why we sort of saw this as a technology first, as opposed to more of a speculative asset, which is what is the first principles of the problems that we're trying to solve for. And I think for us, it's really about speed, it's about efficiency, it's about reliability, and essentially upgrading the network through which we're moving money. If you think about the ledger and the distributed capabilities of the blockchain, essentially allows us to communicate information more effectively, more natively to the internet, as opposed to more traditional networks that rely on batch processing, that takes time to settle over non-banking hours. These are all things that are now improved by the latest iteration of that technology, and approximating how instant messaging is now kind of relying on the internet, which just happens 24/7. So I think about it very much in that way, and these are the problems that we're then turning into applications and use cases which allow the money movement to happen very much instantaneously for them as well.
Yeah, so again, having spent a lot of time in my career at a company like Visa, who sits, the counterparties are banks on both sides of the network. Even while they've got companies like you, Reap, who are important companies to Visa, the people that sit on both sides are licensed entities that are regulated. My friends work at big commercial banks around the globe. They will say, well, what's wrong with the current environment? That they will say they've got faster payment rails now, that they provide great services.
Yeah.
So given what you just described in terms of the way you service your clients versus traditional financial arrangements, like, can you kind of explain the difference in terms of how you kind of approach it versus kind of traditional, or where did the two worlds come together, the kind of traditional finance and stable coins?
I think we're still very much cooperating and working with each other in many different ways, right? We are not replacing the form factor of cards entirely, but rather working with them, right? Attaching the technology to the payment method that is so widely adopted and accepted around the world. So it's not necessarily about completely reinventing that network, but rather upgrading and connecting certain pieces of it. And that's the way that we see our interactions with a variety of other partners. We are, at the end of the day, standing on the shoulder of giants, right? They have done a lot of the work when it comes to creating that network and creating the endpoints in which they have connected. But we come in as more of a technology provider to say, hey, look, this particular rail might be a little bit broken. How do we change it from a messaging network that only sends one byte of information to something that is much more instantaneous? And that's how we connect with each other. We're leveraging the strengths of each other to bring things like stablecoin funded cards into the conversation so that we can combine the best of both worlds.
Yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit. Stablecoin funded cards, and you and I were talking earlier, it's because it's kind of funny to me because I see this across the globe, being in the US 2 weeks ago. There's a complete rewiring that's happening very quickly in what I'll call the expense management, treasury management kind of space by companies like yourselves, and clearly you're a leader in the space. But if I think about it, expense management, payouts, and something you were just talking about, corporate Visa cards. These are not new concepts. They are things that have been around for a while. So. Can you explain for the audience just a little bit about like the magic of, if you will, what you do in terms of combining like a Visa corporate card and how that kind of links up with a stablecoin kind of backed pipe behind it, and what that benefit means to one of your clients in terms of kind of the real-time nature of a stablecoin reserve?
Absolutely. I think a lot of us here in the room, including myself, take a payment method like a card for granted. You take a card, you tap it somewhere, let's say at a Starbucks, it just works. But underneath the hood, there's a lot of complexities, a lot of information that is being processed, being transmitted between various different parties. You know, you and I being part of that ecosystem at Thredd and Reap. There are many things that can then be improved, right? So underneath the hood, if you are taking a card that is stablecoin funded, you can interface with the customers who's funding that card in a currency that is now 24/7. Right, that is able to top up instantaneously, allow you to see the true representation of what value you have within that card. And simultaneously, as an issuer of that card, an issuer of that card would then have the ability to immediately communicate with the acquiring networks and the schemes themselves on, hey, this is a transaction that can be authorized and go through without having to wait for additional messaging. And so everything becomes more instantaneous in this wheel that we're trying to grease. And we're creating this closed loop ecosystem where every party, every counterparty behind the scenes of tapping that card can react and interact with each other much more instantaneously than in the previous iteration of that technology.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And obviously Visa just announced their pre-funding of some of these prepaid cards with stablecoins as well. So the whole industry seems to be moving this direction. So let me hit on another subject, which I think oftentimes gets kind of pushed to the side because it all sounds so magical, but something you're very aware of is, you know, regulation, compliance, the things that are really the hard stuff that goes into this. Can you talk a little bit about how that affects your thinking and how it differentiates you in terms of how you kind of go to market?
Yeah, so I think regulation has become increasingly important with a technology such as this, because if it's as native as the internet, it can really be accessible anywhere. And therefore, it really requires a lot of cooperation between various different regulators across the world, across different lines of thinking, to make sure that it is well consistently regulated across the world. I think we're seeing a lot of activity here in this part, in Singapore, you know, in Hong Kong as well, where there is really clear thought and future-proofing of that particular regulation. And it's informed by the nature and the dynamics of these particular markets of global financial hubs of trade. Historically, they've understood what it means to regulate these kind of technologies that would reinvent the network of money movement, of creating financial services, so they can apply some of these first principles to a new technology such as stablecoin. And you can see that, you know, from Hall 1 to Hall 6, as you mentioned, everybody's talking about it. If you have these kind of well-intentioned first principles, regulators who understand how to future-proof some of these regulations, it allows for an ecosystem to operate with clear guidelines and build the right things for our customers.
Yeah, great. And then lastly, because we're running out of time, just and you just kind of led into it. You know, I mentioned Singapore, like we're here, and it is incredible and it's palpable to see just the amount of energy around stablecoins. So, and obviously you live here. You and Darren kind of built the business here. You've gone global, but you guys are, you know, obviously invested in this region. You know, why so much energy here? And I mentioned I just came from Las Vegas, where stablecoins was a big topic, yeah, but nowhere near the energy here. So why here in Southeast Asia that it's become so big?
I think it's an overlap of a lot of global economies, a lot of global markets. Not saying that the US isn't, but if you just look at our financial infrastructure here, you open up a bank account as an individual consumer, you get access to multi-currency. You do that in Hong Kong, you get access to multi-currency. There is a very strong overlap of the existing international banks, the schemes, fintechs, that allows for a lot more interoperability, a lot more kind of co-creation that innovates, right? And therefore, I think that's one of the reasons why stablecoin is so relevant in this part of the world, because at the end of the day, it's an international technology. It's, despite a lot of it being US dollar denominated stablecoins, it's not about the US in isolation. It's about how do we utilize that to power a global financial economy.
Great. So with that, I think we're up on time. I want to thank you, Kevin, for joining me, and proud to be a partner with you in this journey and looking forward to where you go from here. So thank you very much.
Likewise. Thank you.